And you know, Marcus Aurelius, it only survived with one manuscript. We wouldn't have any Marcus Aurelius had it not been for one of his secretaries and, a very slender line of transmission. So we're in the hands of fate, I fear.
It gives me goosebumps just to think about that. What is the Stoic idea of happiness? How does it relate to virtue and nature? And is virtue sufficient for happiness? Hello, my name is Anya Leonard, founder and director of Classical Wisdom. You are listening to Classical Wisdom Speaks, a podcast dedicated to bringing ancient wisdom to modern minds. Today's Classical Wisdom Speaks podcast is with Christopher Gill, a British philosopher and emeritus professor of ancient thought at the University of Exeter. Gill served as the co-editor of Phronesis between 2003 and 2008 and is author of many books, including the prize-winning Personality in Greek Epic, Tragedy, and Philosophy, as well as his most recent Learning to Live Naturally, Stoic Ethics and its Modern Significance, of which we'll speak about today. But before we begin, a quick reminder to check out classicalwisdom.com to sign up for our free newsletter or become a member and help support the classics. Now, how can we live according to nature? So I'm very excited today to get into the nuts and bolts of Stoic ethics. And, Stoicism has become quite popular. It's become more of the philosophy du jour, which I absolutely love. I like to think of it as a gateway drug into ancient philosophy. But a lot of people kind of like to talk about Stoicism without really getting into the proper tenets and claims. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to kind of understand it a lot better. So let's begin with the Stoic idea of happiness. And this is absolutely critical. What are some of the key ideas and central claims to Stoic happiness?
Yes, this is, of course, one of their most central and distinctive ideas, and fundamental for life guidance as well as for the theory. So, what is happiness? Well, it's not just a mood. It's not just a transient mood. It's a life. It's a certain kind of life. Typically, the Stoics define it as a certain kind of life, and it's the fulfillment of that kind of life. So happiness is fulfillment or achievement of a certain kind of life, something that is lived over a lifetime. But what kind of life? Okay, we always want, everyone wants a life, but what kind of life? Well, there are two key ideas for them. One is the life according to nature, the natural life, and the other is the life according to virtue. And you might think these are quite different, but the Stoics think these are essentially the same. So the underlying idea is that it's natural to have a life that is fulfilled through virtue and the happiness that depends on virtue. That's natural for us. Now, when they say natural, they don't mean, oh, it just happens. Sadly, it doesn't happen a lot of the time, but it's natural to us as a species, as human beings, and it's natural to us as part of the larger world, part of the natural world. So if we fulfilled our nature, if imagine an oak tree that you might there are lots of oak trees, but imagine a really fine spreading oak tree, something that's a magnificent specimen of an oak tree. Well, if we could be a human being like that oak tree, if that's what we're working towards, we would be living the life according to nature. We would be leading the life that is the best for human beings and the best as being part of nature.
So that
So,
seems like it's an easy enough solution, right? Virtue and nature,
well,
but there's
it
more to
is.
it. Yeah.
Well, there's more to it, and the problem is there that we fall short. We don't, we're not that big, wonderful spreading oak tree. We're kind of we wither and we don't grow properly and so on. So that's and we can perhaps talk about that a bit more later when we talk about development. Just on these two kinds of nature, you might say, well, being human nature and the nature of the universe are completely different things. What's the link? Well, they think there are links. Their conception of nature as a whole is that what is characteristic of nature as a whole is qualities like structure, order, and wholeness. These are the key features of nature as a whole. And they are also features of human virtue. They're also qualities of human virtue. That the virtuous life is one that is structured, it is ordered, it adds up to a whole. And the other feature that is in common between nature as a whole, cosmic nature, and human nature at its best is care. Nature cares, they think, in a rather kind of anthropomorphic way. That nature cares for everything in the universe, and similarly, care, the Stoics think, is fundamental to us. It's very natural to us to care for ourselves and to care for others. So there are these, so caring is a function of nature. And if nature didn't care, we would all perish. But we don't. Now, nature, left to its own devices, as it were, cares for everything that's part of nature. And nature is also ordered. So that's the link. That's why it's not arbitrary to say that we want to be both fine human beings and that we want to be part of nature. Not in the ancient world believed that, but anyway, that's how the theory makes sense in the way that it might not otherwise.
So, okay, there's a lot already to just sort of dig into, and some of these questions I know the Stoics have grappled with, and modern people always contemplate. But living according to nature. I mean, nature can be ruthless. You think in tooth and bloody claw. It is in our
Yes.
nature at times to be warring and petty and violent and jealous, and that a large part of finding our order in society is rejecting our nature. So how did the sort of Stoics grapple with the less pleasant aspects of nature?
Well, they certainly didn't ignore them. They're well aware that yes, nature and is ready in tooth and claw. Nature is full of crisis, disaster, and so on. They recognize all this. So when we're talking about nature, we're talking first of all in a very broad global sense. We're looking at nature over millennia, as it were, and in its totality. And we're also looking at our own lives as a whole, and also at what the best kind of life. So for them, the natural life is also the best kind of life. It's the life that we would live if we lived up to the best uh, characteristics of our species. So, and as I say, they're well aware of all the things that might prevent us from doing that. But this is a kind of ideal. It's kind of a lodestar. So we all need some kind of reference points, don't we? Everyone, and religions over the centuries and ethical frameworks have offered you different kind of lodestars, different kind of things we're aiming at. And what the Stoics offer is indeed nature, our own nature, human nature at its best, and the nature of the universe at its best. So that's but yes, we fall short. But then the fact that we fall short isn't the end of the story. The fact that we fall short is the beginning of the story, because it gives us something to aim at, and aspiration, working towards, trying to be the best we can. That is a fundamental part of their ideas about development.
I think that's a wonderful reminder for all of us that, as sort of the cheesy as the saying, it's the journey, not the destination. But
Yes.
quite literally, when we think about our lives and how we're living them, if we realize that it's the process, that we're works in progress, that is the aim rather than some finished product, it kind of takes a little load off.
Yes, yes. I mean, ideally, we would reach the goal. Ideally, we would reach but the goal isn't kind of fuzzy around the edges. The goal is quite clear, but in reality, for virtually everyone, it's a life of progress. It's a life of searching and aspiring. And it's important to recognize that because that affects our attitude towards ourselves. We don't hate ourselves because we fall short, and we don't despise other people. We're fellow searchers, fellow progressors. And there are many in the Stoic writings there are many reminders of that it's natural to stumble, it's natural to fall, and that's why we should treat other people with generosity of spirit and not have an us them kind of attitude towards them. So that's very important, I think.
An important point, I think, now more than ever.
Indeed, indeed.
I'd like to touch on another part of the kind of concepts of Stoicism that often result in a bit of debate nowadays, since we've already gone to Aristotelian versus Stoic ethics. Let's get into some of the other hot topics from the classical ethical world. How do these concepts of ethics and happiness relate to the doctrines of fate and determinism? Because that's a kind of a huge role in Stoicism that sort of modern Stoic kind of pop culture doesn't address as much.
No, it's quite a complex question, but I think first of all, I think you need to be clear about what the Stoic theory is on this, what they would say in the more theoretical elements, and then try and relate that to what we find in more practical and if you like, popular writings like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and so on. There is a link, but it needs to be explained. The Stoics are not what's sometimes called fatalists, strong fatalists. That is, people who believe, well, everything's just determined by fate. So there's no room for individual autonomy. It doesn't really matter what you choose. It doesn't matter what you decide. Everything is determined by fate, a seamless web of causes. And that kind of fatalism is not Stoicism. Stoics do believe that everything that happens in the world forms part of a seamless web of causes, but they also believe that human agency and the human capacity to decide is one of those causes, and it is a particular kind of cause. So in the totality of the total scheme of things, the fact that you are deciding to conduct this interview, that I'm deciding to respond to it, that all the people who are listening to us making their own decisions, that's part of the web of fate. That's part of the causal web that adds up to events as a whole and adds up to fate as a whole. So in that sense, the Stoics are, as I say, what you call compatibilists. They don't much talk about free will because free will raises lots of other problems, but they do believe in autonomy and the significance, the ethical decision, the ethical and metaphysical significance of decision making. So that's at the theoretical level. Well, you might say, well, how does this relate then to Epictetus and Marcus and the way they present things? Well, actually, they too are compatibilists. If you look carefully at the way they talk about these things, Marcus very often combines what Marcus is doing is aspiration. He's saying this is the kind of person I should be, and the kind of thing he's aspiring towards is a combination. He says, look, you should act rightly, you should treat people well, and you should accept that much that happens, especially your own death, is inevitable. That's part of fate. So he isn't just saying, oh, what the hell, just accept fate. He's not saying that. It's a more finely grained reaction. It's a more finely veined kind of self-advice. Act rightly, work towards virtue in your action, and also work towards virtue in acceptance. So acceptance is, as it were, part of virtue. So virtue is both how you act and how you think about the world and what your attitude is. So, and indeed he is. So, and in particular, Marcus is concerned with death. 67 of the meditations are about death. And of course he is, because we're all concerned about our death. We're all anxious about, none of us want to die. None of us find death an easy prospect. We don't find our own death comfortable to think about, and we don't find the death of our loved ones easy to think about. It's very hard. Um, but so we need a framework that recognizes that we can do things, that we can take decisions, and that they matter and they make a difference. They make a difference ethically and they make a difference metaphysically. Um, but also that we can accept that much of what happens in the seamless web of fate is not accordingly to us. And similarly with Epictetus. Epictetus stresses again and again what's up to us and what's not up to us. What to us is to make correct choices. What's not up to us is the totality of events, sometimes identified with fate or with God. Um, so it's a combination. So compatibilism is the Stoic view, and it's a highly credible one. It's a lot more credible than the view that everything is up to us, you know, in a kind of existentialist view that, you know, we can just decide everything, or a kind of individualism. The world is as I want it to be. Or on the other hand, a kind of negative fatalism.
I think that's an excellent point. It's always interesting sometimes when we are trying to discuss these really important and dense topics, and we are loaded with words, or we have to use words that are loaded with other meanings and connotations. And I mean, that's often an issue with Stoicism in the first place. There's so many misconceptions, there's so many ideas that people have that have been sort of filtered through time. And that a lot of these terms that we have to use to understand the ancient Greek world have been co-opted by later ideas and concepts. Obviously, Stoicism, skepticism, cynicism. I mean, there's just so many. So I did want to ask, what are some of the other issues that we have, misconceptions that we have right now about Stoic ethics that we sort of have to combat when we're talking about it?
Sure. I think one of those follows from what I was saying earlier about nature. You know, some people think, well, Stoic ethics is just a kind of lying down and let the universe decide everything. You know, because the idea of nature as a whole is significant. That it's just, again, this kind of fatalism, which as it were leaves everything up to the universe to decide whatever exactly that would mean. So that's one thing. I think some of the other things can perhaps be best explained if you don't mind, if I maybe I could say a little bit about ethical development first,
Oh, please
because
do. Yeah.
I think that will help to explain then what the misconceptions are. Um, because I think that another great strength of Stoicism is its rich uh, panoply of ideas about ethical development, and of course its view that ethical is what we're all doing. It isn't just something you do in childhood. It's lifelong. You know, we go on learning. Ideally, we go on learning. So I think the Stoics think that ethical development combines three strands. It starts out with these basic motives that I mentioned earlier: care of oneself and care of others, that the Stoics think are fundamental for human life. And there are three strands. One is the development of ethical understanding and knowledge, the development of virtue as a form of expertise in living. And a key part of that is coming to recognize the distinction between virtue and indifference that I mentioned before, between virtue and other goods. So that's one very important quality. And of course, it's also coming to understand what the virtues are, what wisdom, what courage, what justice, what temperance, what these things mean, both in theory and practice. So that's one side of it. That's one strand of it. The more, if you like, knowledge-based aspect of ethical development, which they associate with care of oneself, because it's care of yourself in the best possible sense. The other aspect is care for others. And the Stoics don't just think that we have to be kind of habituated into this, that we're naturally selfish and we're born into the world as nasty, selfish little animals and have to be trained into care for others. They think it's actually natural for us to care to others, though we have to learn to, but we do have to learn how to do it well. We have to learn to care for each other well. And we do so by exercising the virtues, by treating ourselves and other people with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. And another distinctive feature of their thinking about the social dimension of ethical development is that it is expressed both in relating to the people around us, our families, the people we care for, the people we associate with, and it's coming to have a sense of the human race, humankind, as part of a larger family or community. So that's a very important part of the social side. So it's not just, so there's two aspects to it. And by the way, it isn't replacing local relations with the community of humankind. It isn't that, well, once you've got the community of humankind, you can just forget about the people around you. No, it's combining those two things and correlating them. The third aspect is emotional development. And emotional development depends on the other two strands. The way we develop our emotions, the Stoics believe, is by acquiring ethical understanding and allowing it to inform our lives, and by developing a pattern of relationships that express that, relationships to other people, to our community, and to humankind. And that if we do that, if we complete those two other strands of ethical development, that will bring about necessarily and automatically a change in our emotional life. And it's that determines how we feel and the kind of emotions we have and the kind of desires we have. And the way the Stoics have a rather particular terminology for this, they think that we will, if we develop in this way, we will achieve therapy or cure of the passions, what they call the passions, the bad emotions, and we will gain good emotions. And this all sounds a bit magical, but what they mean is that the passions are things that are informed by vices, really. And so a lot of the passions are negative towards other people and towards ourselves, of hatred or anger, or spite or self-hatred, self-anger, self-spite. Whereas the good emotions are positive in character and consist of good intentions, goodwill towards others, generosity of spirit, and joy in leading a good life. So the key thing about what they want to say about ethical development is its breadth. It includes these different aspects and they need to go on together. I mean, it won't work, as it were, or it can't work if you say, well, I don't really care about other people. I just want ethical understanding. I just want to know about the virtues. I don't. So fine. So I want to have wisdom and justice and courage. I just don't want to have to be bothered with other people. Well, I think that's going to work, really. On the other hand, it's also not going to work if you say, well, I don't need these virtues. I just need to be loving to other people. Okay, fine. So you're loving, but you're not going to exercise good judgment or show courage or justice. Well, no, that can't work either. So these two have got to work together. And then this is distinctive. This is unusual, actually, in the ancient world, is the belief. There's this sort of belief-based view of emotions that if you change your beliefs and change your understanding, this will change your emotions. So it's quite complex, but it's also highly credible. It's a kind of combination of, in modern terms, cognitive psychology, cognitive psychotherapy, if you like, but also this strongly ethical dimension. Now, coming back to your first question, which I might seem to have dodged, which is what about the misconceptions? Well, I think often people think about emotions, for instance. They think, oh, well, the Stoics want us to get rid of all emotions. The Stoics don't want us to have emotions. the Stoics want us just to have the stiff upper lip. I'm not quite sure what this stiff upper lip means, but anyway, but it obviously means it obviously something like, but it obviously means. I think it's often taken to mean, well, no emotions, no room for emotions. But no, it isn't that we don't have any room for emotions. It's getting rid of bad emotions. It's getting rid of emotions that are based on false beliefs, ethically false beliefs, ethically bad judgments in the way we treat people. So that's, I think, the most common misconception. Stoics, no emotions. No, so that's wrong. No, we just want the right emotions, the right kind of emotions. Another kind of misconception is, if you like, that paying attention to care of oneself, but not care of other people. There's sometimes Stoics are seen as just individualist, rather hard individualism. There's a kind of what you might kind of call muscular Stoicism, or kind of muscular ideal. It's a bit like muscular Christianity, if you know that phrase. And there's a kind of muscular Stoicism that's just, as long as as long as I'm controlling myself, um, that's all. That's it. That's fine. Well, no, that's not fine either. Care of oneself has to be matched by care of other people. Those are those because we are social animals. We're rational animals and we're social animals. So that's another misconception that Stoicism is all about going off into the desert and caring for yourself. Well, no, it's not. No, it's living in the world here and now in the particular community and context that we find ourselves in, whatever that context is.
Yeah, I think there's a great line from Marcus Aurelius at one point where he's saying basically, be really hard on yourself, but be really kind to others. Like, don't hold yourself to the
Exactly.
high standards, but we don't know what other people are going through. So it's always
No,
worthwhile to give people the benefit of the doubt.
exactly. Generosity of spirit is a very important dimension. And it's only other people who, I mean, just as we have to manage our own lives. Only we can manage our lives. We have to move our arms and we have to move our minds, and only we can do that. You can't control other people. They can't control us. But what we can do is manage how our attitude to other people is and how we respond to them. So I think those are the two most common misconceptions about emotions, about individualism. The individualism is quite an important one because I think, and especially now that Stoicism is very much, has a popular dimension, and some people do, and especially men, I think, do tend to, can focus on just the care for oneself and individualism at the expense of the others. But there is also a movement within Stoicism called Stoic care as a movement, and that's also important, I think.
Oh, I
And
love
also
that. Stoic care. That sounds like a
Stoic
great
care, yes, no,
initiative.
it's
Yeah.
great. And it's a wonderful initiative, but it does remind us that Stoicism isn't all about muscular Stoicism. And then also the point about nature, that living in the life according to nature is living a fully human life, as well as living a life that we think is in line with nature as a whole.
With regards to emotions, how are the Stoics viewed, even in the ancient time period, with regards to the concepts of catharsis? Because I think that's very much something that we've been raised to see as a positive ability to go to the theater and lose your emotions. Obviously, that is originally an ancient Greek term. Does catharsis and Stoicism mesh?
Well, they didn't. There's no ancient Stoic writings which discuss catharsis, but I think they would be rather skeptical of it because I think catharsis often means arousing the passions in order to, in some sense, purify them. But I think the Stoics say, well, can we just go straight to the purification? I, I, I think they would be skeptical of it. And you might say, well, that's very impoverishing, and perhaps it is. I mean, I don't know, but they don't. it isn't something that they have a great deal to say about, really. So I don't. I feel a bit cherry about making it up on their behalf, really.
Going back to sort of the modern aspect, how has Stoic ethics contributed to modern ethical theory with regards to virtue ethics? And do many think that Stoic ethics isn't really relevant to modern ethical theory to begin with?
Well, I think the thing about modern virtue ethics in the sort of if you like post-war era is it's mainly been put forward by people like Bernard Williams and McIntyre and so on, who are most familiar with Aristotle's ethics, and who for whom that is the go-to text, as it were, is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and you can see why. Because you can just pick it up. I can just look, translation here, one book, Aristotle. Now, Stoic ethics is a bit more difficult than that because we have lost a lot of Stoic writings, and so we have to get through them, okay, if you like, at second hand by later writings. So I think it's been a bit of a slow burner, the role of, but I think it. My view is, and that's partly why I wrote the recent book on Stoic ethics, because I want to get Stoicism, Stoic ethics, and modern virtue ethics closer together. And I think there's a number of reasons why they're a very good fit. Um, One is because what Stoicism contribute is a combination of ethical rigor, but also a kind of universality and a kind of a breadth of vision. And also because I think what Stoicism can also contribute, I've mentioned several times, the more universalist approach, because Aristotle, when you read Aristotle, you're often vividly aware, strongly aware of that he was a person of his own time and his own culture, and his values, his attitude towards women, for instance, and slaves, and lots of other things we really have a problem with. And his some of his virtues, like magnificence and magnanimity, they don't no longer really seem like virtues to us. Stoics have a much more universalist approach. Their framework for the virtues, wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, these are still very they fit now just as well as they fit in the ancient world. So that's another reason why Stoicism fits. Another reason why Stoicism is a potentially great contributor to modern ethics is, of course, something that's often been seen as a weakness, their sense that there's a link between the life according to nature and universal nature, the nature of the world, that our virtue and happiness might be linked with the larger natural world. Well, of course, that's now a highly relevant and contentious topic because of the importance of environmental ethics. In the age of global warming, we have to be aware of ourselves not just as human beings, but also human beings as part of the world. And the Stoics are already very much aware of that. So I think Stoicism gives a pathway into a lot of modern concerns. It can be meshed with um, modern virtue ethics, especially with more what you might call naturalistic virtue ethics, of which there are some examples, but also environmental ethics. That's a really key contribution. Now, I think these contributions aren't yet fully realized, but I think that's going to be part of the dialogue of future years. I hope so, anyway.
Well, I'm always completely pro having more dialogues about ethics and philosophy. I think that's a brilliant starting point to begin with. Now, I want to finish up with one last question I ask a lot of professors over the years, and I always think it's interesting. You mentioned lost texts. Now, I know there's a very exciting new development right now where they've been using AI to unravel carbonized papyrus that's been in an ancient library that it was buried under Mount Vesuvius. If they found a text that has been lost that you know about in that library or in an Egyptian trash heap somewhere, what is the number one lost text you really hope they find?
Well, I think it would be by the Stoic theorist called Chrysippus. I would really like to read Chrysippus's On Ends, on the goals of life. that would be my number one text, I think, because we have some tantalizing brief quotations from it and a lot of references to it. But I think that would be a really, I mean, Chrysippus was a really powerful mind. I think he can be compared with Plato, with Aristotle, with Socrates, with any of the great minds of antiquity and the modern era, Kant and uh, and John Stuart Mill or whatever. I think he's one of the great theorists. He wasn't just an ethical theorist, of course. He was also a logician and physicist. But I think I'd like to find Chrysippus's on ends,
Well,
Peritone.
here's hoping that they do, because I think there might be even a Chrysippus text that they've found. I mean, I know most of it so far has been Epicurus text, but
No,
well, we'll
sadly,
keep.
no, no. We're still hopeful. Yes, it's only because of this accident, because of Herculaneum, because of that group of people were keen on Epicurean texts. There's many accidents in transmission of ideas, and Marcus Aurelius. It only survived with one manuscript. We wouldn't have any Marcus Aurelius had it not been for one of his secretaries and a very slender line of transmission. So we're in the hands of fate, I fear, when it comes
Oh,
to knowledge.
it gives me goosebumps just to think about that, just that single thread,
I
Um,
know.
well, thank you so much for talking with me today and kind of delving in a bit more into Stoic ethics. I'll put a link to your book, and you have several books as well, but to your most recent one regarding Stoic ethics, so people can kind of delve into it more themselves and understand this important and complex philosophy that is taking the world by storm, but I think can have an amazing impact.
Good. Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and thank you for your questions and our discussion today.
Thank you for listening to Classical Wisdom Speaks, a podcast dedicated to bringing ancient wisdom to modern minds.